Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Inspirate Business. We have a very special edition of this show. We are living in unprecedented times. We, as humanity, looking at the screens, the major news channels, and all you see is heartache in the Middle East. You've seen Palestinian children, mothers that are being massacred. And this affects us all. It has an impact all around the globe, and specifically also on an economic side. And this being a business show, we want to focus on that. There are so many different tools that one can use to create this awareness against the Israeli occupation, against this, let's call it what it is, a genocide. And we have somebody very, very special. A lady who I just found out comes from the same village as my ancestors, from a small village in India called Clover, who is the daughter of a stalwart of the anti-apartheid movement, who I believe was the founder of non-racism in our beautiful country that has now become this constitution that we're so proud about. The daughter of late Dr. Roshan Dadoo. Welcome to the Inspirate Business Show. It's an absolute honor to have you, Roshan Dadoo.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. And yes, a fellow Colvadian.
And you say it so beautifully. So, Roshan, you represent the BDS movement. You are involved as a coordinator for South Africa, but you have a rich history. So before we even talk about BDS, and we're going to go into the depths of it, what's working, what's not working, I think it's more heightened than ever if you look at this current crisis, which from 7th of October has created something so different, I think, from previous issues that has happened in this conflict. And we'll talk a lot about that. But just let's get an understanding of you, particularly coming from a family that's so focused on social justice. How did you get involved, with BDS?
Well, I think you mentioned that my father was the late Dr. Roshan Dadoo. So I think since I was born, I've been involved both in our anti-apartheid movement. I was born after both my parents, who were South African. By the way, my mother comes from a Jewish South African family. And she joined the Communist Party, which is where she met my father. So they both ended up in exile. My father was sent along with Oliver Tambo at the time precisely to gain international support, to tell the world what was going on here, what apartheid really meant, and to get support for our struggle, all aspects of our struggle. So I suppose I've been born into struggle. And of course, the Palestinian struggle, the two struggles were very connected at the time. There was a great sense of internationalism, and people would meet each other in different places around the world. Even there was military training together in some places with the PLO at the time. And so there has always been an understanding that our struggles are interconnected. And that's why when Madiba said, we cannot be free without the freedom of the Palestinians, it really meant something profound. And I think it still does, even more so now.
And I mean, you make a good point, right? And I see this very strongly on the streets with all the mass movements that are all for the Palestinian cause. And you've seen ordinary folks, South Africans, that are coming out, and you ask yourself, how come? And you realize that it's because of our own struggles. And so we can resonate with the struggles of the Palestinians. You also see this in a place like Ireland, who have also gone through their own struggles. You see this in the USA with the African-American support for the struggle, because, again, it's coming from that whole civil rights movement. So there's a lot of similarities, and you just cannot but resonate with the struggles of the Palestinians, as heightened and as catastrophic as it is. I mean, so much more than even what maybe we've gone through.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of people have said it's worse than apartheid. And, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, for instance, and more recently Frank Chikane after his visit there with Mosenclair from the evangelical churches. But I mean, what we're witnessing now, it has been, Zionism has been a project of ethnic cleansing since the beginning, since the 1890s, and then implemented, obviously, after the Balfour Declaration and with the militias, the terrorist militias that initially settled the land which then became the state of Israel. But I think what we're seeing now clearly is genocide, because it's also not just, as the Western media puts it, and a lot of our media follows that story, that it's Israel's war against Hamas. But it isn't. It's Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people, because if you look what's happening also in the West Bank, there's been the most deadliest year there, and that's the occupation force soldiers, the illegal settlers, basically with a shoot-to-kill policy, raiding into refugee camps and towns and villages. In the West Bank, I think there's now well over 100 people that have been killed since the 7th of October. And that isn't, there's no Hamas there as such in the West Bank. So you can see clearly it's definitely a genocide against the Palestinian people. I mean, obviously, when you look at what's happening in Gaza, it's almost unbearable. People trapped in that densely populated, small area where nowhere is safe. I mean, they are just bombing hospitals, the UN UNRWA schools, which are supposed to be a place of safety, not allowing food or water or medicine. This small, what did the UN people say? It was a drop in the ocean, the few truckloads that were allowed in. And then telling people to move from the north to the south and bombing the south even harder. You know, it's absolutely horrible. It's unbelievable to have to watch that unfolding and see that the international community is paralyzed because of the United States, which actually vetoed the smallest thing they could have done, a humanitarian pause, vetoed that resolution. So again, you know, the US, which is here now for this trade summit, AGOA, we're protesting there tomorrow at 10 o'clock, because you can't do business as normal. You can't be speaking about trade deals with an enabler and funder of genocide.
So, you know, with all of this, right, it paints maybe somewhat a picture that you are defenseless, right? That there's, what can you do? And this is why here is somebody that is doing something, right? Now you look at the governments and you say, you know, nothing's been done. People are watching. But what can we do, right, as ordinary citizens that care for humanity, you know, watching this? And this is where BDS comes in. So let's get a little bit deeper into what does BDS do, your role with BDS, and what can you do to actually play a meaningful role wherever you are, right, in terms of just being in support with the Palestinians.
I think it's important to remember that the call for boycott, divestment and sanctions came from the Palestinian people themselves. And it came from the broadest bringing together of Palestinian civil society. And it was a call that was very closely made from our anti-apartheid call, because we did exactly the same thing. We called on the international community to boycott, to divest, and ultimately put pressure on governments to introduce sanctions, to isolate apartheid South Africa, to make it economically hard for them, and to isolate all sorts of contacts which they use to make themselves look like a normal country, like sports events. You remember the protests that there were, particularly in England and in New Zealand, when the all-white Springboks were playing matches there. And it was a way of raising up what's going on, saying we don't want this sports washing. We know what's really going on. And in fact, even more so, I think the apartheid Israeli state uses those sorts of things, uses sports and culture and music and, you know, as if they're a normal country. So I think it's all of those things that people can do, which both raises awareness amongst people in the country, in that case, in our struggle where I was in England, because I can tell you it took decades. At the beginning, it was very few people who were interested, and obviously also in Britain, there was a lot of racism. So trying to raise up what was really going on with apartheid here, it took a long time and a lot of work. of ordinary people. And I think now we need to do the same, where it's our duty to do the same for the Palestinian people. And it's a long struggle, it's a long haul. It's not that everyone can just one day do one thing and solve the problem, but we have to put pressure on our own government as well. In many ways, our government is quite taking a lead in some of the multilateral fora, but definitely why we have an apartheid Israeli embassy with a full apartheid ambassador sitting here in Pretoria right now is unbelievable. How many years after we became a post-apartheid state? So we need to put pressure on our government. And I think that pressure is mounting, by the way. I think they're beginning to feel the heat from the protests, from people coming out on the street and just raising this demand constantly. We don't want this apartheid embassy here. So I think it did work in our struggle. So there's absolutely no reason why people putting pressure can't work again. And I think that we've maybe refinding that sense of internationalism and that understanding that it's not just a struggle of people somewhere far away that's unrelated to us, because of course even more now in this globalized neoliberal and racial capitalist global economy, there's so many interconnections and there's so many ways in which we can put pressure and say, we're not going to support this genocide, we're going to stand against it.
All right, so we've come to the end of this first segment. I think what we want to do is immediately after the break, dive a little deeper into what those tactics are that one can use to really create this pressure on, as you say, this Zionist regime. Immediately after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate Business, and on our Red Hot Couch, sponsored by Aza Collective, we have a very special woman, Roshan Dadoo. Again, I repeat, for me, an absolute honor. The daughter of a stalwart of the anti-apartheid movement and who was groomed in the struggle credentials and lives that, it exudes in your blood, being the daughter of the late Dr. Yusuf Dadoo. Now we're talking about the BDS movement and its strategy, this awareness it's creating, that was created by civic organizations, by Palestinians themselves. I want to dive a little bit deeper into BDS. So it stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanctions. Modeled a lot around that sanctions that was put onto the South African apartheid regime that was very successful. Let's draw a bit of parallels. Is it the same? I mean, our dynamics were different in South Africa. Can you use the same tactics and strategies, or do you have to be a little bit more creative?
Well, I think obviously every situation is different, but I think fundamentally it's the same idea. First of all, that Israel is declared an apartheid state, because that means you can use the precedent of South Africa to say, if the whole world now thinks it was right that sanctions and an arms embargo, an oil embargo, were imposed against South Africa because it fitted the description of in the Apartheid Convention, well, now there is an international consensus that Israel is an apartheid state, so therefore we should equally be isolating that state. Economically, we should be having an arms embargo at state level. And in order to get there, it takes people around the world. We've seen in America amazing scenes of the Jewish Voice for Peace leading massive protests and sit-ins in stations, and then yesterday again in the UK.
Was it 100,000 people?
100,000 people, and those governments are the most reactionary. But if you think about it, in our struggle, we were facing the Thatcher government in Britain, the Bush government in America. So equally, now when we look back, maybe we think, oh, it was easy, it wasn't that hard, people understood and da-da-da. Actually, it was really hard work, because like now, we're facing some of the most extreme reactionary governments in the West in particular. And yet you can see people people's power does work. People are coming out, even though there's been so much, more so in a way with the question of Palestine, demonization of people who support the Palestinian cause. Like in America, academics losing their jobs. In Britain, this ridiculous idea that you could ban the Palestinian flag or ban the chant from the river to the sea. I mean, I don't think they thought that through because they have a Palestinian embassy there. So what would they put on their flagpole if it became illegal? But anyway, in spite of all of that, I think you can see the tremendous spirit of internationalism of people like you mentioned in the beginning, the Black Lives Matter movement, where when they were protesting in the States a few years ago, Palestinians were sending messages of support. So I think there is a resurgence of that spirit of internationalism, and we can do it, and we have to push our government. There's no excuse with our government, and the world looks to South Africa because we are the only country that has defeated an apartheid regime. So we really have to keep the pressure on.
Yeah, in defense of our minister, Naledi Pandor, I mean, she's been very vocal in support. But of course, you know, and I think it's also, and this has been the issue, because you're dealing with an economic system, and you spoke about this just before the break, that's so controlled by the US and, you know, Zionism state, and, you know, it's all interlinked with the UK. I mean, like you said, we we extending the AGOA agreements. There's we quite compromised as well, right? Because here South Africa is sitting economically dependent on these international global powers, and then also has to take a stance for justice. So it is a tough situation you're faced with.
Yes, I mean, the world is a very tough place, and, you know, challenging the global economic arrangements isn't easy. But as you say, I think our foreign minister, Minister Pandor, has really taken a very bold and leading role within both the African Union, trying to get rid of that ridiculous situation in which, in an underhand way, Israel was given observer status. Now, at least that's been put aside for the moment, but also in the UN. And you can see within the UN system, the majority of countries are in favor, in fact, of at least humanitarian aid getting through to Gaza, possibly even a ceasefire.
Yeah, it was an overwhelming majority, wasn't it? Like 134 to 15 or something. Yeah.
It was a huge majority. So with just the veto of the United States, are you telling me that all the rest of the world collectively can't put pressure on the United States? I don't believe it. If they could do for Russia, when Russia invaded Ukraine, they were crying for humanitarian corridors, and why doesn't Russia allow this? They immediately imposed sanctions on Russia, targeted against specific oligarchs and their wealth that's accumulated around the world. They immediately booted Russia out of FIFA and other sports tournaments and so on. So why can they not do it? They can, and I think we can put the pressure. I mean, if you're talking about our economy already, our government says it's looking for different markets. I mean, the whole BRICS arrangement, the whole move to the east, to China and other countries. There's obviously more room to expand our economy within our continent that hasn't yet been leveraged, I would say. And our trade with Israel is relatively small. It's not going to be a major bankrupting thing if we cut off trade and you know, just stop trading. Most of our exports are coal and diamonds. But the thing with the diamonds is we export them in a raw fashion or after just the first stage of manufacturing them. And then we import, most of the imports from Israel are diamonds. So how does that make sense? Government has policy around expanding beneficiation of our mineral resources, which they argue would be job creating and upskilling workers in order to produce, you know, not just the more polished stones and so on, but actually the jewelry and so on, and export the finished product. Here's a perfect opportunity. cut off the trade with Israel and really implement that here. It would be a job-creating situation, according to our own government in their policy around
And you see, you make a very good point around that, is that, okay, it's all good to say, and this is the argument that people are saying, okay, you have all these Israeli products. I mean, the one thing that they talk about is they say you can boycott all of them, but most of our computers all have some Israeli chip in their technology. You know, I think it's Intel or something like that. But where are the alternatives? So the argument that you said, if you don't consume that particular product, what is the alternative? And I think this is the opportunity that you bring about. You say South Africa can bring about that industrialization aspect in terms of even the diamond industry, right? And then you bring in an alternative, so then you don't have to go that route with Israel. And you can do this in so many other sectors. You bring in China and Russia and all the alternatives to this global West.
Absolutely, and that is supposedly the policy, one of the sort of economic policies of our government. But I think, you know, when you look at how products are made, and I think we should, and we're trying to, you know, everyone wants lists of hundreds and hundreds of products to boycott, and to find exactly where the, you know, a specific component comes from Israel, or where there's a product that in some countries is made in Israel and exported, but in South Africa, perhaps that same product with the same branding actually has no connection to Israel. So we are trying to, it takes a lot of research, and there is a team of people who are really looking in detail. And I think we should know where our products come from and what components within our products come from where. But I think in terms of boycott as a political campaign, what we found in our anti-apartheid struggle and what the BDS movement now is finding is if we target the most complicit, so where something is clearly exported directly, it says made in Israel on it, like these plastic things in, I think they're in Builders World, these Keta, they make plastic like sheds and outdoor furniture things. And it's the label is on there, it says made in Israel. So obviously we want to boycott that, but as a political campaign, you also want to then demand to see the manager of the shop and put pressure on the manager. You know, why are you selling Israeli products, leaflets outside the store? Not necessarily boycott every single shop, but stand outside the Discoms or the Builders Worlds and say, this is what we're complaining about. Don't buy Israeli products. Put stickers on the products, or fill up your trolley with all the products from Israel. Get to the checkout and refuse to pay and make a big fuss. Those were the sort of campaign tactics that worked in our struggle. So it's also, as well as your personal conscience, and of course, you know, people might not want to buy a product that is, you know, that has some connection to Israel, and that's fine. I mean, I have things that I don't like buying Moroccan products, for instance, because I support Polisario. Polisario has not called for a boycott. That's my personal conscience.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. We just come to the end of the segment. I think what we want to do in the next segment, let's go more into this, what I call conscious consumerism. And I mean, there's so much we can talk about that immediately after the break. Welcome to Inspirate Business, where we're here to inspire, to empower, and to enlighten you. And we're talking around the boycotting, the sanctions, the divestment of the Israeli regime and everything related to it. And we were just before the break with a very special guest, Roshan Dadoo, talking of what I would term this conscious consumerism. And I think it's a term that's been used a lot. And I think whereas before people have become more educated, people want to do the right thing. And I think I'm finding that very strongly with this since the 7th of October issue. You know, you're getting humanity from various walks of life. From, I mean, you've seen such a strong Jewish support for the Palestinians. You've seen Christian, support for the Palestinians. Just ordinary folk. in these countries that are supposed to be supportive of the Zionist regime. I mean, we talked about the UK, the US, in Europe, these huge marches. And I think humanity is being awoken to seeing these atrocities. So people want to do the right thing. How best to do it is through what you, on a daily basis, you going out and you shopping. You have to buy certain things, and it's just doing the right things. You want to know that, is it ethical? And so what is the BDS doing in terms of that, to create that awareness? I mean, there's so much to do, right? But you have to target a few, or take a few levers that have the highest impact. So is there something like, for example, I mean, in South Africa, we created that Proudly South African label, right? Is there something where maybe products that get endorsed to say that these are in support of, the Palestinian cause? Would it be something like that, or is that too radical?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to get all Israeli products off our shelves. We need to stop importing products from Israel. But also, I think we need to target our campaigns, because it's much more effective if we're all targeting one company. And if we can get that one to disinvest or stop selling the goods, then we can make progress on other companies. So I think one of the companies that we're targeting is Cape Union Mart.
Okay.
And we're targeting that because the owner, who bills himself as a proudly South African family business that's grown up from nothing into now being a flourishing business with various brands, he directly is funding the Israeli war effort as we speak. I mean, this is not just somebody who may have once supported Israel. He won an award from one of the Zionist, one of the sort of 4 founding Zionist organizations in the state of Israel, for having raised the most money internationally for the apartheid war effort after the 2014 bombing of Gaza. And he has now been on the television publicly calling for that same financial support from South Africans for apartheid Israel when we're seeing this genocide unfolding. And he is the owner of Cape Union Mart. He is a South African. Now, that is somebody who also is on the board of governors of the Jewish Agency. Now, there are 4 institutions that started from the 1920s. If you think about it, after the Balfour Declaration, their sole purpose was to raise money to buy land in Palestine and to enable the settlement. So they would make offers of, if you go, you will get education and you will get a house and so on and so on. They're the 4 founding pillars of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people and the occupation of their land. And this owner, Philip Kravitz of Cape Union Mart, is on the board of governors of the Jewish Agency. That's like a senior position within the apartheid Israeli state. So he's more complicit than many other people. He's directly complicit, and we should be calling him out. He posts pictures of him meeting people like Cyril Ramaphosa. I don't know how long ago that was. But still, how can we be allowing this sort of influence, direct influence, from the Zionist founding institutions of the State of Israel to be playing out here with our politics? So that's one. Another one is ZZ2 tomatoes. ZZ2 tomatoes are the largest distributor and producer of tomatoes commercially here. There are 2 nurseries, Israeli companies, one in Limpopo and one in the Western Cape. If you look on their website, you see the logo, it's Hishtil, it's called. There are 5 of these nurseries within apartheid Israel in areas ethnically cleansed from 47. But there are 2 exact companies here. Now, it's done as a PTY, a joint partnership. But it's actually, if you look at the logo, it's written in Hebrew. It is an Israeli company. So we're calling on ZZ2 tomatoes to say, stop getting your seedlings from there. For the South African investors in those two Israeli companies, those nurseries, to pull out. You can find other investment partners. We know how to grow tomatoes. I don't think we need an apartheid state to tell us. So it's not about job losses or closing companies, but it is about making those ethical choices as a consumer, as an investor, and putting pressure on companies so that they do make those choices.
Are there other companies? I mean, what I found pretty, I mean, we as South Africans, we are encouraging foreign direct investment, given our economic situation. But fairly recently, we have one of the big companies, Clover, which is a household name, that has been invested into by an Israeli company. So how does the South African government support an investment of such a nature when it is, now also focusing on the support of the Palestinians?
Well, exactly. It makes no sense. And from the beginning with the unions, it was Gewusa and Fawu in the case of Clover. We worked on the case for the Competition Commission to make the case that by allowing this apartheid Israeli company to buy in, it was going to have a detrimental effect on the workers here. And indeed, it did. There was a clause to say there would be no job losses for so long. As soon as that time was up, they wanted to close plants, they wanted to sack workers, they reduced the working conditions. And as you know, the workers then took a very brave and long strike action. And we're still calling on our government and on the company to disinvest, because you could see exactly during that strike, Palestinian trade unions were sending messages of solidarity and joining online into big mass meetings of workers here, sending their solidarity to the workers here on their strike, because they're both facing the same issues, the same oppression, and the same, repressiveness of this company, both in Palestine, in that case it was in the occupied West Bank, and here. So again, it shows how interconnected our struggles are. And you're right, we need to continue to put pressure
There's
on.
also, I mean, you spoke about it in the South African context, where the cultural boycott was very powerful, because you had ambassadors that were standing up, for the anti-apartheid struggle. I mean, I know with the work that BDS is doing, the likes of Roger Waters, from Pink Floyd, a real proponent. You've seen a lot of these Hollywood actors that are standing up. I've seen one of the actors now that actually defied the British ban on that flag and put it on his car. He put the Palestinian flag on his 4x4. I mean, recently you had Orlando Pirates going and playing against an Israeli team. You had the famous Black Coffee that played Israel. So what is BDS doing around that from the cultural side of things?
Well, I mean, we had a huge campaign around Orlando Pirates, and I mean, it became at least a talking point everywhere across the country, and it put pressure on them. But their excuse was the government doesn't have guidelines that would enable them not to do it. I mean, it's ridiculous because it was a friendly, so you don't have to, they didn't have had to play that. And it was a particularly, Maccabi Tel Aviv is known for its horrendous anti-Palestinian racism. But nevertheless, there was pressure put, and one of our demands is for our government to assist by making policy guidelines around cultural and sporting boycotts, which would enable then swimming South Africa. Again, there's a swimming competition in a world junior swimming competition a few weeks after the Orlando Pirates story. Again, we were putting pressure. We can't allow this to continue. Again, they're saying, but the government doesn't help us. It doesn't give us the guidelines to be able to say we're not going to participate in an event held in apartheid Israel. So it's putting pressure on the federations and on our government to assist the federations in the case of sport. With culture, it's appalling. I mean, this way in which apartheid Israel has wheedled its way into South Africa, particularly around DJs and that sort of that kind of cultural music world. But what's really heartening is that in the last 3 weeks, hundreds of South African artists have come out to support artists against, in fact, African artists against apartheid. And it's amazing, people from all different fields of arts and culture, some quite well-known musicians and visual artists and performance artists. So I think you're right, there's that heartening moment when I think people are really feeling that they have to act and they have to come together and put pressure then on those artists who are refusing to understand why they should not be performing in apartheid Israel or with complicit money from their stupid embassy here.
Okay, we've come to the end of the segment again, and on that, like you said, that heartening moment, where I think people are being awoken to the plight of the Palestinians. We'll go to the last segment immediately after the break, and let's talk some pragmatic approaches for you as the viewer, as the consumer, what you can do, and let's get some advice from Roshan immediately after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate Business, and we're already at our last segment of this very special edition with a very special woman, and she has been downloading some profound insights with her experience coming from struggle credentials and working very closely and very passionately and very knowledgeable around this whole issue around boycotting, divesting, sanctions against the apartheid Israeli regime, drawing parallels to our South African context, which worked very well. And you made a very, very good point that, we all see it today as enjoying the fruits of, the struggle after fighting against this regime. But it was a very tough, struggle. Not everybody just supported the sanctions initially. I mean, you still had the US that was still supporting the apartheid regime. And only until the world woke up and there was a galvanizing of support. And so we got to keep on knocking, right? Now, what I want to do, I want to bring this really down. We spoke a lot about, some of the tactics and strategies, but let's bring it down to a practical level. Our viewers out there, there's mothers that are shopping every day. There's business people that are dealing with suppliers. And they may say, look, it's very difficult for me to get out. I go to a store, you guys say I must boycott Woolies, and then I'm a Woolies consumer. What do I do? So let's provide some practical, interventions for an ordinary citizen on this country or of the globe. What can they do, to be, because people feel it. There's one thing that you're getting out of this here is that people are aligning and resonating with the plight of the Palestinians, and people wish they can do so much more. So perhaps from your experience, provide some of that, insight and tools that one can adopt.
Well, I think for boycotting the shop completely, Cape Union Mart, for all the reasons I've said, because the money you're spending there is going to fund the genocide, basically. I mean, it's clear. So boycott that entire Cape Union Mart shop. But not only that, what worked in the case of our struggle was people standing outside the shops with leaflets on a Saturday, explaining to people why they shouldn't go in, why they should boycott the shop. And I think that's something that we really need to do. I mean, I spent most of my life standing up, and it just takes a few of you. But if there are a few of you all across the country, ultimately, the boycott of South African goods became known across the country, across the world. But it takes a lot of hard work and really trying to explain to people why. Why are you saying don't go into this shop? Saying to the workers in the shop why you are making this protest, and putting pressure, obviously, then on the owner of Cape Union Mart. But I think with other shops, it does become very difficult. If your nearest shop is a Pick n Pay and you tell people don't go to Pick n Pay, I mean, you're not going to reach a critical mass very easily that would put pressure on that shop. But if you go in the shop and you look and you see products of Israel, produced in Israel, then you can make a fuss. Then you can say to the manager, and then the manager doesn't like it. And then the manager says to the head manager or head buyer, look, all these people are coming and annoying me. It's really getting me down now. They're coming and shouting at me about these Israeli products. And then you start to put pressure on the shops to get rid of the produce. Because we're not saying we want to close any business down just like that. We're saying if you do this, then we will support your business even more so. What we don't like is that you're selling Israeli products, or we don't like Cape Mart, that you're giving money for bombs, literally, that are bombing Palestinians. But if you stop that, we'd be fine. Again, with Puma, it's a global campaign. So that, again, is not just us here in South Africa. Puma sponsors the Israeli Football Association and teams that are in the occupied territories, in the settlements, illegal settlements. And as part of a global campaign, then even if it's just you and your friend outside a shop with a few leaflets for an hour or two on a Saturday morning, people are doing that all over the world. People in Malaysia, people in Germany, people in Britain, everywhere there's Puma, a big Puma presence. And we know Puma's big in South Africa. The clothes are very, very popular across all our demographics. There's also sponsorship. They sponsor a lot of these young musicians and hip-hop things and sporting teams and sports bursaries. So they've really moved in big time. So it's a good target. And we'd say, if you just pull out, if you stop your complicity, we'd love to buy your clothes and your shoes and take your sponsorship. It's not about, there has to be an end point. Just end your complicity. Stop sponsoring the apartheid Israeli soccer team, and we'll, we love Puma things, so we'll be back. It's something you're putting pressure on them that they can actually do. And there is, hopefully, we're reaching some kind of tipping point in our struggle also. When the struggle internally mobilized, say when the children in 76 went in the streets, in the 80s with the trade unions, and there's an upswing of support in the world, then it puts pressure on the companies, because if you're a company, you're looking to the future. Now, do you want to be on the right or wrong side of history? So Barclays Bank, for instance, the UK bank, we had a long campaign against them. Eventually, they did pull out.
IBM
because they
as well.
could see that there was, in the future, there would be better place to go back into the market here. And I think that you can put pressure. We can, if we target it, if we also, where there's a global campaign, because companies now are so global, and where we call on the most complicit of our South African businesses. But also we're asking people, if you see Israeli products, take a picture of the label and the shop it's in, and send it to sabdscoalition@gmail.com, so we can collectively make that list and see where those products are and how we can put pressure on those outlets. Because I think we all have to be involved in this.
So if somebody wants to, you guys are a volunteering organization, purely, and you're around the globe, but strongly based in South Africa. You have offices in South Africa.
Well, we have virtual offices here, but we're affiliated to the Palestinian BDS movement.
All right.
And so through that to, for instance, like Palestine Solidarity Campaign in the UK, that arranged that massive demonstration, to the groups in the US, like the Jewish Voice for Peace, and to groups around the world. So there are global campaigns targeting companies that have a presence around the world as well. So we're part of that global movement.
So if somebody wants to get involved, with BDS movement, how does one go about doing that?
Form a group, be active somewhere, whether it's in your street, in your religious community, in your workplace. As I say, all these artists have come together, and they've just come together themselves and organized themselves into an African Artists Against Apartheid, and now reaching out to artists and cultural workers across the continent. So I think, wherever you are, you can do something, and join as a group, join as a small group, even if you're just you and your neighbors, and you spend an hour every Saturday outside one of the shops, leafleting and telling people why they shouldn't buy products of apartheid Israel. It's worth it. It all adds up. And if you think people are doing this all over the world, so even if you're just 2 or 3 people, don't be despondent, because there's 2 or 3 people, not just hopefully all over South Africa, but all over the world, saying the same thing, making the same pressure, often on the same companies. For the case of Puma or McDonald's, where we saw they were giving free food to the occupation soldiers. And of course, they're a global company, so everywhere around the world, they're under pressure. In fact, the McDonald's here was so scared, even before we called for a boycott, they wrote a letter saying, did you see that? Saying, no, but we are completely separate franchise. Well, no, then you should be putting pressure on the Israeli partner, the McDonald's partner. That's not good enough. You can't just say, we're totally separate. Put pressure then, and we'll all come back to McDonald's. Well, there are many other reasons not to go to McDonald's, but still, you know, they should be putting pressure on that parent company, because they're clearly worried. Companies are worried by boycotts, even the thought of a boycott in this case.
Yes, of course. I mean, and there's a huge consumer backlash, right? So, look, we've come to the end of the show. I mean, it's thank you so much for, you know, blessing us with your presence and all the insight that you provided. You guys are funded, I guess, through normal mums and pops and people that provide. If people want to just understand a little bit more about BDS, or wants to help with providing some funding, how would they go about doing that? Where do they go to for that?
Well, I think if they contact sabdscoalition@gmail.com, that's our email. I'm the coordinator.
Coalition@bds.com.
At gmail.com.
At Gmail, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And then hopefully we can assist, but that would be wonderful. We want people to contact us and support, and, you know, let us know what they're doing. Let us know when they see products as well. So all of us can make a list together and be actively part of boycotting, as well as boycotting for one's own conscience, which is important too.
Yes, and the website itself is, you know, what's the URL for BDS? Okay, we'll put it on the on the screen.
Great, that would be
so
great.
So people can go in there, and I guess there you highlight things like Cape Union Mart and all of those, and so people can understand why also they need to boycott, because there's history behind each of these organizations, right?
And putting pressure for companies to divest, or individual investors to divest, for instance, from Hilaal, and therefore increasingly putting pressure for governments to move towards sanctions.
Yes, we've come to the end of this intriguing show, and so much can be done. I think what the message that's come out very clearly from Roshan is that wherever you are, that you feel the pain of the Palestinians, you can do so much. I think the power lies with the individuals. And people, you know, she's encouraging us to go and do whatever we can. If it means tomorrow morning, you know, getting up to your store, your local store, and you see an Israeli product, you know, making your voice heard. Go to the manager and say, this is not on. Go and educate people around Clover, around a whole lot of stuff. We all have to work together. It can't be done by one organization. It's a galvanizing of various sectors of humanity in support of the Palestinians. And I think that's the least we can do. Thank you so much for your esteemed presence and for your insight. And we hope to get you for many other shows in the future as well.
Thank you very much. And I think if we all do work together and continue protesting, continue the boycotts, step up what we're doing for Palestine, even a little bit, ultimately we will see a free Palestine.
We've seen it in South Africa, and it has worked, and we will see it in Palestine. As you say, a free Palestine. On that note, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.